If you've picked up a game controller anytime since 1996, you know exactly who this fire lizard is. We've seen him on trading cards, animated in cartoons, and stitched onto backpacks for decades. That massive fame makes it incredibly easy to assume we know everything there is to know about how he works. But almost all of us stop at those surface visuals. We look at the cute orange design and ignore the actual raw game data running quietly in the background. Today, we are pushing past the nostalgia to rip open the precise database for Pokémon number 0004. When you look closely at that unedited source code, the familiar mascot disappears, leaving you with a massive iceberg of bizarre biology, shifting mathematics, and strange lore. The connection to the natural world begins with the name itself, which was pulled directly from the real-world salamander. Throughout ancient mythology, salamanders were documented as mystical amphibians that specifically dwelled inside roaring flames. Game Freak took that ancient lore and translated it into specific physical traits buried deep inside the game's Pokédex entries, starting with Pokémon Yellow. The developers programmed in a detail stating that making a distinct burning sound. By the time Pokémon Sword was released years later, they added another biological quirk. When it rains, that same tail physically spouts visible steam. These entries move the character beyond a simple fire sprite, giving it physical properties that react specifically to silence and weather. But that lore is strictly qualitative. When you dive into the hard game mechanics, specifically the breeding data, the anomalies get much stranger. This pie chart shows the species' actual gender ratio, revealing a staggering biological imbalance, where 87.5% of the population is programmed to be male, leaving only a tiny 12.5% sliver of females. And if you look at how the game classifies this small reptile for reproduction, it sits squarely inside the dragon and monster egg groups. We usually think of this Pokémon as a guaranteed gift handed to you by a professor in a pristine lab, but its wild encounter mechanics tell a completely different story. If you actually find one roaming the wild grass, its base catch rate is set to exactly 45, making it incredibly stubborn to secure. This diagram shows a probability breakdown of that encounter. If you throw a standard Pokéball at one with full health, you are going to fail over 94% of the time, leaving you with a measly 5.9% success rate. Run all of those mechanics together, and the game design dictates that obtaining a wild female is a massive statistical anomaly, making it far rarer than many creatures the game explicitly tells you are special. Yet the database hides something even more surprising: baseline statistics the developers secretly altered behind our backs as the series evolved. Back in Generation 1, the base stats were fairly straightforward, including a single, unified special stat resting at 50. This bar chart tracks a quiet developer nerf. Initially, defeating one yielded 65 base experience points, before dropping to 62. But notice the harsher hidden nerf to base friendship. For Generations 2 through 7, it sat at 70, until suddenly plummeting to 50 today. These invisible code adjustments mean over the last 2 decades, developers actively altered the files, making this creature mathematically weaker and emotionally harder to befriend. Digging past the nostalgia reveals a highly complex matrix of shifting variables and mechanical tweaks. The iconic blocky sprites, first seen back in the year 1996, have evolved far beyond their original pixels. Today, they act as iterative software, subjected to constant rebalancing and recoding by the developers. What we actually have here is a mathematically nerfed, predominantly male, dragon-monster hybrid with incredibly hostile catch rates. And it carries some of the highest stakes lore in the entire franchise. If that small flame on its tail ever goes out, the creature dies. Choosing this starter means managing a fragile biological legacy that has been made mathematically harder to sustain with every passing decade.